Chinese understanding, now over 50 years old. So Zoe, the chair, will be saying making some remarks at the end. And my job today is to chair. I'm the director of that Chinese student, Kerry Brown, and everyone, our very distinguished panel has 10 minutes, 12 minutes, all extremely experienced, so they're going to religiously stick to this time. And then there'll be a chance to have your wise corrections and points at the end, quite a lot of time for discussion. So the Belt Road Initiative, the EIU, is very exciting. The big forum's just happened in Beijing, which I'm not sure some of the speakers will refer to. I think it happened, the Treasury Chancellor went there in the UK, so quite high level. And Donald Trump managed to get someone to go, so that was pretty impressive. In the last month, I was sort of working out. I've been to Serbia, Latvia, Canada, Scotland. I'm going to Brazil tomorrow, Denmark, Switzerland. What is the link? Apart from me. One Belt, One Road. And all of those places had a very different sort of approach and narrative. And so I'm particularly fascinated today to hear from the panel about how these different stories and understandings from very different perspectives are sort of able to kind of intermesh and match up. The one thing you can say, one thing I can say after that amount of travel is everyone is talking about this idea. Whether they're talking about the same thing is a different matter, but they're certainly talking about the vision. And so that is interesting. This initiative from China has created this sort of stir, and at least it's aroused people's interest. So the fact that we've got such a great audience on Saturday afternoon in London is also, I think, testament to that. So I think you've been giving programs. Actually, just a bit of housekeeping. Anyone got mobiles, if they can turn them off, or sort of have them self-explode in the corridor or something? So there was a fire here actually on Saturday. I think my office is still there, I haven't been there yet, but I think there was a fire here. So if we do hear a fire alarm, do take it seriously and just go chasing at it. You know where you came, this is where you go out. There's no other way. So just don't be complacent. So without more ado, I will now ask Mr. Shao, the Council of Policy Analysis and Strategic Planning at the Chinese Embassy in London, to make this presentation. Mr. Shao.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so happy to see so many faces here today on this weekend. And it shows the interest about the Belt and Road Initiative of China. And I would also like to thank the organizer, the SACU, for their efforts to contribute to the China-UK understanding of the years. Especially, I know that the founder of SACU, Dr. Bennett, is very famous for his studies about China. He has one famous saying I would like to quote here. On the ancient Silk Road, it was not only the silk, the ceramic, the tea that are transported. It is also the science and technology and many, many others which are transported on that Silk Road. That's why I think it's very timely for us today to talk about the Silk Road in the 21st century and the role of China and the world, and what kind of challenges and the opportunities we can see in them. I myself have been in Britain for almost 3 years, and over the past 3 months, I have been participating in many, many discussions and Belt and Road. And yesterday, I went to Lucy, and the day before, I was in Chatham House. We had all these big events on the Belt and Road. And I myself was at the ceremony to see off the first railway freight train from London all the way to my hometown in Zhejiang province, Yiwu, which took about 20 days, and he carried, can you see that it is milk powder, as well as the vitamins and the whiskeys, all the way through 9 countries and 12,000 kilometers. It's a long journey, but I hope that I will have an opportunity to try on that long trip to China next time. And talking about the Belt and Road Initiative, you know that it was initiated by President Xi in 2013. And over the past 3 years, there have been rapid development and all this interest in this initiative. And just over the last weekend, there was a big seminar in Beijing, and I'm sure that you are well aware of it. And I think more than 1,500 experts, scholars, as well as 29 heads of states and governments participated in the meeting. At the meeting, there were very lively discussions upon the subject of the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think on the British side, due to the general election, which will first in a few weeks' time, Theresa May sent her apologies, but she instead sent Mr. Hammond as her special envoy to attend the event. And I think there are huge opportunities for further participation by the British enterprises, as well as bankers, insurers, and the designers in this Grand Belt and Road Initiative. I just want to highlight within the next few minutes some of the propositions from the Chinese side about this Grand Initiative. We believe that these initiatives have 5 characters which are mentioned from time to time. I just want to briefly touch upon it. Number 1, that we believe it is a road for peace, because we believe the Belt and Road Initiative cannot develop without a stable environment of peace, especially if there are wars, there are the conflict between ethnic minorities, or if there are any disturbances. You cannot ensure the smooth development of the Belt and Road Initiative. And that's why we believe that this is one of the top priorities. And secondly, we believe that the Belt and Road Initiative is carried out as a road of prosperity. We know that more than 100 countries participated in this big meeting, showing that they see wonderful opportunities to gain from the cooperation with China as the rest of the world. And thirdly, we believe that this is also a road for opening up more transparency, and we believe that it is a good opportunity to promote the economic cooperation and trade among the countries of concern. And fourthly, we believe that the important initiative is a road of innovation, because we know that with the rapid development of science and technology, through the development of the Belt and Road Initiative, we can make better use of the technologies of both the developed countries and also developing countries like China and other countries, so that we can build a new Silk Road. Some people say that we can also promote the digital Silk Road, characterized by the e-commerce, such as the Alibaba, as well as the other e-commerce big giant companies. And fifthly, we believe that this initiative is also characterized by the exchange of civilization and culture. That's also an important feature of what China is proposing. We believe that the mutual trust, mutual respect, and educational exchanges like between the King's College and the counterparts in China will become very important component of the Belt and Road Initiative. And I heard that Kerry has been traveling all over the world over the past few days to talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, and I'm sure that he will be even kept busier in the months to come. And I think probably you're also aware that during the big conference,
the Chinese side made some big announcement. I just want to list a few. For instance, China has promised to make a further 100 billion RMB investment in the new Silk Road Fund. And China's Import and Export Bank will make further special loans worth 130 billion RMB yuan. And the China National Development Bank will have a special loan worth 250 billion RMB yuan to support the infrastructure development, the financial cooperation, as well as they will work with the AIIB, the BRICS Development Bank, the World Bank, and other financial institutions. I just want to mention one of the points we want to promote, that is the training of young people. Probably you heard that one of the agreements during the big meeting is that in the next 5 years, we will provide short-term training opportunities for more than 250 young people from all over the world to China, so that they can they can know better the economic and social development in China, and to promote the scientific exchanges between the two countries. And I hope some of you will be lucky enough to be on the list of the 2,500 people. Furthermore, we will provide $1 billion to the South-South Cooperation Fund. We will provide 100, what we call the Home of Happiness, to the countries around the Belt and Road Initiative, and we will provide more opportunities for other international institutions. I want to conclude just by saying that Britain is one of the important contributors to the Belt and Road Initiative. We believe that Britain, on the very west end of the Eurasian continent, even if there are all the talks of Brexit these days, and there will be an election in the next few weeks. There are all these uncertainties, but I'm confident that Britain will become an important component and contributor to the Belt and Road Initiative. And that's why our email boxes have been filled with requests from entrepreneurs, experts, lawyers from Britain to seek opportunities for cooperation with us. And I myself accompanied the Chinese ambassador just a few days ago to the Department of International Trade of Britain, and we had a lively discussion about the CPEC, that is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And Britain sees huge opportunities for carrying out a three-party cooperation, even in Pakistan. And I think there are more places where we can carry out the three-party cooperation. Finally, I just want to mention that the people-to-people exchanges, especially the exchanges among people like you, the students, the scholars, the experts, or among the museums, are very important component. And I think over the years, the SACU has been very important in this endeavor. And I'm looking forward that when China and Britain is building this new golden era of relations between us, people like you and people like in the King's College and elsewhere, we will work together hand in hand to build this Silk Road of the 21st century. And later on, I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Wow, so that's a great call to arms. So it's now a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Frances Wood. She needs no introduction, but I will introduce her. A tremendously experienced scholar who's British library for many, many years, and has actually written about Marco Polo going or not going on the Silk Road. So it will be interesting to see if she's changed her mind about that. So Dr. Francis Wood, who's the second vice president, will now speak.
Thanks. Thanks very much. I'm much more interested in hearing other people's views, but I think it is important when we talk about the Silk Road, whether we're allowed to say the new Silk Road or the 21st century Silk Road, we should think about what these amazingly important channels of the past actually mean and what they meant in the past and what they then mean today. You can see from here, this is just Central Asia with the maps of the great trade routes going across. And the importance of the so-called Silk Road is that it's not just silk, it's not just commodities, but also ideas that move, and they move in both directions. And because of the diversity of the terrain and the territories that they traverse, it's a question of the encounter of enormously large number of different peoples. People in Afghanistan, peoples of Central Asia, people who've all but disappeared from our sort of 20th century view, like Sogdians or Tanguts, for example, who ruled the northern part of the Silk Road. So the Silk Roads encompass many peoples, many ideas, and indeed many commodities. I mean, the name, as you know, it's not the name that the Chinese originally gave to these routes westwards, but it came from a German geographer. And one could perhaps, if you were more Sino-centric, you might call it the Jade Road rather than Silk Road, because jade was moved from Khotan in the west across into sort of central China from about 3000 BC. Silk to Rome is well known, and that's how the name is given in Europe anyway. And it is, of course, the province of travellers. I have included Marco Polo. In particularly, I think the central book is the important bit. I think we all learn about Marco Polo in primary school at an age when we don't question, perhaps, enough, but nevertheless, the story is a good one. But I think it's a road, it's a series of roads, it's a series of routes, and it attracts people who traverse them. To me, more interesting commodities are the kind of much more ordinary things that go from west to east. I mean, for example, peas go from the west to China, cucumbers go from the west to China, apples go from Central Asia in all directions all over the world. I mean, the home of the apple is somewhere in Central Asia, and it spreads out. So the diet of the Chinese, and indeed the diet of people in the West, would be very different if it were not for the Silk Road. And for China in particular, horses were fantastically important, from the Tang to the Qing, who come from Central Asia, brought across the great steeds of the Tang Emperor Taizong, or pictures from Dunhuang caves, or here below you have the Qing Emperor, Qianlong Emperor, receiving tribute of horses from Kazakhstan. But I suppose for many people, one of the most important things, as I mentioned, is the movement of religion, the movement of ideas across Central Asia. That Buddhism comes into China from India, Islam comes in rather later, Manichaeism also arises, comes through from the Sogdian cultures, and Christianity also arrives at a certain point, but it doesn't make an amazing impact via the Silk Road. So Buddhism is perhaps the most significant, but and one of the things that I find quite interesting is that Buddhism goes a little bit in both ways. That idly watching television one evening, I saw a program about a Viking site, 9th century site, Helge. And in this site, it revealed how much the Vikings were magpie figures, because the contained in the site remains such as a rather nice little spoon from North Africa, this crozier from an Irish bishop's staff, and also a Buddha, a 6th century Buddha from Afghanistan, which had made it all the way across the Silk Roads to Scandinavia. What it meant to people there, I don't know, whether it's just something you just collect metals, but you have Buddhism going in both directions in a small sort of way. And here on Zoroastrianism, a letter from Princess Jun about lighting a fire in a Zoroastrian temple in Chang'an. Islam becomes one of the most significant religions to traverse the Silk Road by the mid-8th century. And coming to Dunhuang, this is, for me, the cave temple complex at Dunhuang is possibly the most significant site on the whole of the Silk Roads. It's kind of central in a way. It's vitally important for the history of particularly Buddhism in China, but also peculiarly it gives us a complete picture, for example, of the financial administration of the Tang dynasty out in this area, because in one of the caves at the cave temple complex, as you may well know, cave 17, was discovered an enormous cache of documents on paper. And I think paper is quite important because we might say that paper is also something that traversed the Silk Road. Paper, invented in China probably about the 2nd century BC, makes its way across into Central Asia to the Sogdian people were using paper in quite large quantities in the 3rd century AD. There are the famous Sogdian letters which were found in the Gobi Desert, in which a lady, a Sogdian woman who'd been abandoned by her merchant husband, writes to him suggesting that she'd rather be married to a pig or a dog than married to him because he'd left her at home with no money, no food, and so on. She wrote this on paper. So it was a paper in the 3rd century, found out across the sands of the deserts. By the 15th century, you get the rise of the maritime trade routes, and in a sense, the Silk Roads become less important in terms of kind of mass movement or length of movement. But of course, what happens is that you get international trade by sea, and as we know, I mean, that's I suppose in a sense why we call it Belt and Road rather than Silk Road, because if we talk about Silk Roads, it does rather fix the routes in Central Asia. It fixes them as land routes, but the idea is that one should include sea as well as, so we've got the sea routes coming back into favour after their beginnings in the 15th century. But I suppose also include the railway. That's an earlier railway train. This was only going to Spain, I think, carrying Christmas decorations. But I wanted to put in something about the travelling on the Silk Road, just to show the difference between then and now. Because when the 19th century explorers from the West, drawn by the stories of fabulous civilizations on the Silk Road and possible treasures, they had to travel by camel or on float down rivers on inflated rafts or climbing mountains, incredibly cold climates at certain time, or sometimes they could travel by river, but the rivers have now mostly dried up. You have people like, who's important for the British study of Dunhuang, Aurel Stein, who was a surveyor and a map maker. And one thing one might say that though Stein is now reviled in China as being someone who stole great art treasures from China, one thing he is admired for, and that is his meticulous photography and map making. His maps are still valid. His photographs give us an absolutely perfect view of what things were like out there in Gansu at that time. And he was an archaeologist and a collector, filling our museums and some of those in India with his finds. I did want to say at this point, this is very important for any of you who are interested in Dunhuang, that there is a wonderful little exhibition on Dunhuang in the Prince's School at this moment. It's only on for a month, but it includes one of the caves at Dunhuang. They're very apologetic in the Prince's School. They keep saying it's very small and it's very late, but actually they should be very, very proud and say it is tiny but perfectly formed, and it is exquisite. It comes from the Tangut period, which is not very well known at Dunhuang, so it's quite late, 12th century, when the Tanguts, a people of possibly sort of Tibetan origin, were occupying the area. One of the things about the Tanguts is that they brought fantastic artists in to Dunhuang and into the Central Asian desert. If you look at the majority of the caves in Dunhuang, I feel that they do look rather as if they were painted by sort of slightly ham-fisted local people. I mean, they're very impressive, but if you look at them closely, they are not highly skilled. The Tangut caves, on the other hand, epitomised by the one that you can see in the Prince's School, are exquisite. The line is wonderful. I mean, this very, very fine painting. So I do urge you to go and see this perfect little cave and a very nice exhibition about Dunhuang, which started only last week and is on, as I say, for a month, brought over by the Dunhuang Institute, the people who are looking after the caves so wonderfully now. I'll just go other explorers who traversed the area in the 19th century, including some of my favourites, the intrepid lady missionaries, the Cable and French, the two Mrs. Cable, two Frenches and one Cable, And then what comes back from the Silk Road? What do we see about the Silk Road? The paintings and the manuscripts. As I said, paper being possibly one of the most important things to be moved across Central Asia via the Silk Roads, including the Diamond Sutra. And I would put in just a mention of all these 19th century Europeans. Should one talk about Europeans on the Silk Road? Perhaps one should de-stress their importance, but they were important in the sense that they discovered things. They did make these amazing archaeological discoveries. And there were people in the area at the time who were quite interested. Ye Changshi, who was the Education Commissioner of Gansu, who did write in his diary that he knew, he'd heard about the caves, he'd heard about the paintings, he'd heard about the manuscripts, but it was just too far to go. So he didn't rescue them. But Joseph Needham, SACU, one of SACU's great founding members, made his expedition to Dunhuang, which was mentioned just now, in 1943. He was, of course, not really, his aim in life was not to see the Dunhuang caves. It was basically to look at the oil fields at Yumen and also to look at various other technological aspects of things like water and water resources in the area. But he did end up at Dunhuang for quite a considerable period of time and made quite considerable studies of things that interested him, like the technology of horse riding, the use of stirrups in the wall paintings at Dunhuang, and so on. And as has been mentioned, now it's very different. What is happening now? We're having the train, which will go from China all the way across to London. That was this January. And also one of the things that most struck me the last time that I was in the Gansu corridor, as it were, was the fact that instead of seeing this kind of wonderful sort of lunar landscape of grey, yellowy soil and little tumps of rock and tamarisk and so on, now the Gansu corridor is simply paved with solar power panels, and there are wind turbines and so on. I mean, these are all part of the changes that are essentially coming with the new initiatives. I mean, it is quite extraordinary for me, steeped as I have been in the history of Aurel Stein and the other explorers of the 19th and early 20th century, when you hear about how difficult it was for them to struggle along the Gansu corridor. And now you do it in a large bus, and there are lorries hurtling past you like this, and then you look out of the window and it's solar panels everywhere. You don't actually see the train usually from the road, but you know that it's there. And you're very, very conscious that this is now a motorway, a massive motorway of considerable importance. And I would put in, I suppose, a plea. Of course, there must be solar panels and there must be wind turbines and all these sorts of things must happen. But I do think that also some of the developments along this route need to be considered fairly carefully. The expansion of the population of somewhere like Dunhuang is going to put an enormous pressure on the water in the area. I mean, you can't treble the population of a city without thinking about what it's going to mean. I have huge respect, particularly for example, at the Dunhuang caves themselves. The Dunhuang Academy and the team there are absolutely brilliant at protecting the caves, at trying to think of ways of keeping a lot of human breath out of the caves by making these little models like the one you can see now in the Prince's School. They do a terrific job of making the caves survivable as well as visible. So visible, but under conditions that make it possible for them to survive. But I do think that, I hope that things are going to be considered, that it's not just all going to be lorries sweeping through, but that the Silk Road's history will get perhaps a little look in this One Belt and One Road. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. So did he go?
Did Marco Polo go? I'm inclined to say no still, but the world divides 50-50. Give me evidence that he did and I'll believe you.
Okay, so last but not least, Keith Bennett, the Vice Chairman of the 48 Group Club. I just peeked at his speaking notes and I know that the first time he went to China was 1981. So almost
Oh my gosh, yes, that's long, yes. So you may remember Marco Polo going to yeah, almost. Thank you very much, Kerry. I'm pleased that Frances laid a lot of stress on the Dun Huang in what she had to say, because as Kerry has already exclusively revealed, my own first visit to China was in 1981. And at that time, I was taken to see what was then a very popular dance drama that was on stage in Beijing, probably one of the first post-cultural revolution works of its kind. And its title was Friendship Along the Silk Road. And it was based on stories that were found on the paintings that had been found in the caves of Dun Huang. And I mentioned that in the spirit of Frances's talk to show the deep history and thinking that lies behind the present policy that has been rolled out and which is now called the Belt and Road Initiative. As many people will know, the Belt and Road was first announced by President Xi Jinping in 2013 in speeches that he made on visits to Indonesia and Kazakhstan. But a number of the projects which are now considered integral to it were actually initiated before that. I'll give a couple of examples, such as the China-Kazakhstan oil pipeline, which was agreed in 1997. The first section was completed in 2003, the second section in 2006, and the third section in 2009. Or the Central Asian gas pipeline, which was agreed between China and Turkmenistan in 2006. The pipeline, which also by then included Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, was fully launched in 2009. In 2010, it was agreed to extend it into Western Kazakhstan, and the three lines of that were connected respectively in 2010, 2012, and 2014. But so, whilst the Belt and Road Initiative doesn't come from nowhere, clearly there has been a very qualitative change since it was formally unveiled in those speeches of 2013. And to see just how transformational this is with regard to China's footprint in the world, I'd like to recall the words of Deng Xiaoping, apparently said to the North Korean leader Kim Il-sung at the beginning of the 1990s, and which largely guided Chinese foreign policy and its global presence for the next 2 decades. These are known as the 24-character guideline, and translations vary, but the one I've chosen reads, observe calmly, secure our position, cope with affairs calmly, hide our capacities and bide our time, be good at maintaining a low profile, and never claim leadership. Now, if one looks at the Belt and Road Forum held last Sunday and Monday in Beijing with, as we've heard, some 30 heads of state and government delegations from more than 100 countries, and hundreds of others from international organizations, business, think tanks, and so on, whilst the affairs were, by all accounts, handled calmly, and whilst it has helped to secure China's position, China might be considered to no longer be simply biding its time, was not maintaining a low profile, and whether it chose to claim it or not, was clearly giving leadership. Of course, this observation is not meant to put Deng Xiaoping in contention with today's leaders. His words were based on the situation at the time, how to cope with it, and indeed, I would argue, how to prepare for the future, a future which is now in the process of arriving. So if China is in the process of giving leadership on the world stage, the question that obviously next arises is, what kind of leadership is that going to be? China is steadily advancing to the position of the world's greatest, largest economy, although of course we know that because of the size of population and so on, in GDP per capita terms, it still will lag behind for a considerable time. But certainly China is emerging as a great power in the international arena. And the question is, will it behave like other great powers of the past, or will it be different? And I think this question is thrown into bold relief, not only by the Belt and Road Initiative and by President Xi's speech at the forum there, which is available online on the Xinhua News Agency, for example, and I suggest everyone read it, but also by President Xi's speech earlier this year at the World Economic Forum in Davos. If you look at those speeches, Xi's confident defense of globalization and his distinctive articulation, or even I would say redefinition of it, as an inclusive process that has to respect the interests of all countries, large and small, developed and developing, of different religions, cultures, and so on, presents the clearest possible line of demarcation and alternative vision to the aggressive dystopia of Donald Trump's America First protectionism and such related phenomena as Brexit and the thankfully now checked, at least for the present, rise of political figures from the far right like Marine Le Pen in France. You can say it is a choice of Xi Jinping's Chinese dream or Donald J. Trump's American nightmare. Now, if China is objectively coming to occupy a place of leadership in the world, it continues to reject hegemony. Every time I talk with Chinese friends and colleagues about the Belt and Road Initiative, as I do very often, I'm told things like China may have the IPR, the intellectual property rights for the BRI, but to succeed, it needs to be a collective endeavour of all. It is simply too big a project, stretching over decades, for China to do on its own, even if it wanted to. Another thing I've been told repeatedly in China in recent years is that we, the Chinese, do not want to see a situation where only China is prosperous and developing, and other countries, including our neighbours, are not. Now, the question that arises there is it naivety to take these statements at face value? And basically, I'd say that I don't think it is. One doesn't need to simply take it as a statement of altruism. If anything, it is common sense. China cannot develop and prosper sustainably behind closed doors. Reform and opening up have been intrinsic to its remarkable economic transformation over the last nearly some 4 decades. This cannot continue without markets for China's goods and services and increasingly outlets for its capital. And moreover, if your neighbour's house is on fire, the flames are also likely to reach your own door sooner or later if that fire is allowed to rage unchecked. So a community of shared destiny, as President Xi likes to call it, is something that is in China's enlightened self-interest. Another question, of course, that gets asked about the Belt and Road Initiative is this just empty rhetoric or so much hot air? And here, this question, of course, is asked much more often in the somewhat more cynical West, a lot less when I speak to people from Russia or Pakistan or Central Asia. And I would say, no, it's not just rhetoric or hot air. It is happening and it's delivering. Of course, it's a project for the whole of this century, so it's not all happening now. But as I've already indicated in a number of areas, it was already happening even before it was formally unveiled. To take some of the things that are going on now, Minister Shao mentioned the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This is a $62 billion project that will link China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in the northwest, right down through Pakistan to the Chinese-built port of Gwadar in Balochistan province, which is facing onto the Straits of Hormuz. Gwadar already received its first major shipment of Chinese goods in December 2016. Pakistani officials predict that the project will result in upwards of 700,000 direct jobs between now and 2030, add between 2 to 2.5% to Pakistan's GDP growth, with the value of the projects equal to all foreign direct investment in Pakistan since 1970, and equivalent to 17% of Pakistan's 2015 GDP. The East African Railway project will embrace Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, and South Sudan, not only promoting connectivity and interchange of peoples and goods between the African countries themselves, but also linking to one of the endpoints of the maritime Silk Road in the Kenyan port city of Mombasa. Already in October 2016, the electrified 750-kilometre rail link between Addis Ababa, capital of landlocked Ethiopia, a country with a population of 100 million and annual GDP growth of a little over 6%, went operational for freight service, with passenger service due to start this year. My next door neighbour happens to be the Africa editor of the BBC World Service, and she has seen this train in action and she tells me it's great. Again, many people will say that the Belt and Road Initiative is ignoring the geopolitical challenges, or it will flounder on them. And this is a point that can't be dismissed. Indeed, they've already raised their head. Part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, for example, passes through Kashmir, which remains a disputed territory between Pakistan and India. And this prompted, unfortunately, an Indian boycott of the Beijing Forum, something which I consider to be mistaken and short-sighted, and I believe that India will come to regret this. But beyond this, the conflict situations along the Belt and Road, for example in Afghanistan, Ukraine, Syria, Iraq, and the Middle East generally, clearly present a formidable challenge. But taking a somewhat longer-term view, most conflicts, whatever their apparent form, have their root in poverty and in a lack of development and opportunity. It takes a development, a project of the imagination and scale of the Belt and Road, perhaps not so much to resolve the immediate conflict, but to remove its root causes. Final question, what's in it for us? As Minister Shao has already said, there are major opportunities for Europe in the Belt and Road, be it for German high-end manufacturing, or for Britain as a financial centre, where Philip Hammond seems to be trying to compete with Hong Kong and Singapore for the rights to act in that capacity, and in such fields as professional services, including accountancy and the law, as well as architecture and design. Major UK companies that I know that are already heavily involved in Belt and Road projects include, for example, HSBC and Standard Chartered in banking, Linklaters and Pinsett Masons in law, KPMG in accountancy, and Arup in architecture and design. Quite a few of those projects are involving the energy projects in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. However, compared to other relevant regions, top-level EU representation at the forum could be said to have been somewhat lacking. Those represented at the head of state or government level were, according to my calculation, Greece, Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Italy, and Spain. So this is essentially Europe's southern periphery, and the CEE, Central and Eastern European countries, not the core economies, and a number of them, like in the cases of Hungary, Poland, and Greece, with either economic or political contradictions with the mainstream of the EU. The same level of representation that those countries were fielded was missing in the cases of the major economies of France, the UK, and Germany. Of course, both in France and the UK, the political timing was exceptional. But that also depends in part on whether or not the idea of having an early snap election really did come to Theresa May during an Easter walking holiday in Wales with her husband. Because at least according to the Times, she had ruled out her participation in the forum considerably before that. In the case of Germany, Mrs. Merkel's absence was more clearly politically driven, with widely leaked stories appearing in the press suggesting German, and hence EU, given the present balance of forces in the EU, discontent with aspects of the final communique of the summit. So, whilst there are plentiful opportunities for European companies and economies, the Belt and Road Initiative is going to go ahead regardless. At this moment, China wants and is encouraging Western investment and involvement in the Belt and Road. Holding back now runs the risk of being seen as a missed opportunity in the years to come. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so to kick things off, I'm going to have one question for each of you, and then we'll head over to the audience. So, Mr. Shao, Zheng, as I understand it, there are three principal imbalances at the moment between the way China engages with the world. One is the imbalance of investment. As the world's second biggest economy, China is a growing but relatively small investor. So in the UK, I think it's less than 1% of foreign investment. The second is in terms of trade. So obviously we know, having read Mr. Trump's amazing interview in The Economist, and I heard from an Economist journalist yesterday that apparently the transcript was even more extraordinary, including giving you an extra 3,000. Yeah, giving you an extra 3,000 years of history. Apparently, China has 8,000 years of history, according to Mr. Trump.
It's very generous of it.
Yeah, no, really. He said, and he said something like, "Mr. Xi is a great guy. He likes me." Yeah, good luck with that one. So, in that interview, he complains a lot about the trade imbalances, and I think with the EU and China, it's about 450 billion euros a year, but for it's 2/3 in China's favour. So obviously trade, imbalances, and presumably services will increase the flow of more trade from
the EU to China, but that's obviously a concern. And the other you referred to, and also all of you referred to in a way, is innovation and China's innovation hunger. So presumably these are important things for the Belt Road and Belt Road Initiative. How quickly do you think that those imbalances will be addressed by this idea? Do you see a sort of hunger in China to, really make these a core focus, or are we getting the story wrong?
Yeah. No. You go ahead.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the question. I believe that is also a question on many people's mind about the imbalances of trade, investment, and I can give you a few figures if I may, because at the moment China's bilateral trade surplus with the United States, according to the US side, is something like 300 billion US dollars. But on the Chinese side, it's not so much because of the transit past Hong Kong. And the deficit with some European countries, as Kerry mentioned, is also quite big according to the international standards. However, I think this is something due to the different levels of development of Chinese and American economies. I worked in United States for 4 years, and during that time, I watched some documentaries. One of the ladies who was laid off from a factory which moved on to Chongqing in China, she complained about it, but later on she went to do shopping in one of the big retailers, and she went to buy the Chinese goods because it's much cheaper than the American-made one. So that's the complicated situation. So I believe that the Belt and Road Initiative, as we talk about, will to some extent help to address these kind of imbalances. For instance, now China regards Britain as one of the top destinations for China's overseas investment. Just a few weeks ago, China's Geely automobile company opened a green London taxi manufacturing factory not far away from here, and it was the first such factory opened in Britain in the past decade, worth about 300 million pounds, and it is zero emission, use a lot of electricity, and I think it will greatly reduce the road pollution down here. This is one of the examples, and if you can visit the city, you can see many of the Chinese investments are there in the forms of buying real estate or setting up insurance companies or banks and issuing RMB denominated RMB treasury bonds. All these, I think, is a trend which are happening. It's not happening overnight, and I think it will also take time. And so far, according to my figure, according to the One Belt, One Road initiative, China's overall foreign investment stands at about 18.5 billion US dollars at the moment, and it has created 180,000 jobs overseas. This is at this stage only 3 years after the announcement of the initiative, and I can look ahead 5 years or 10 years. I'm sure this figure will double or even triple. And I think this will also solve the problem of trade imbalances. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And so, Francis, so as I understand it, the actual term Silk Road was invented by a German in the 19th century. And it was Silk Roads. I mean, it was...
Well,
it was
he said Silk Road. I think one tends to say Silk Roads because we know there's a northern and a southern and so on, and there are lots of little bits that I know.
So this is the wonderful pictures you showed and the sort of the way that you've kind of had experience of this bandwidth of different kind of routes. Do you think, though, it's sort of a bit nostalgic, and we have this kind of very unified vision of Chinese history whereas it should be a vision of Chinese histories, and that in a sense it gives a kind of idea of simplicity and a simple, rather static view of China's relations with the world in the past that we're trying to regain. Whereas in fact those relations are always enormously complicated, and an historian as eminent as yourself sort of tracks down the sort of elusiveness of this history that kind of breaks apart. It's almost like histories, multiple histories. And in a sense, if we think of this as being a new Silk Road, we're buying into a kind of bit of a myth.
Yes, I do, because there are various reasons. I suppose, coming back to the sort of historical thing, it is quite clear that, we talk about the movement of things, the movement of goods, but again, that's to sort of suggest that things flow smoothly, whereas we know that everything would go from one oasis to the next very slowly, and it would change hands. The piece of silk going from China to Rome would probably change hands perhaps 20, 40, many more times. That very few people went, as it were, the length of the Silk Road. Things might, but not the people with them. Also, you have this extraordinary kind of breaks in who's ruling the Silk Road, the ups and downs. If you think of the fact that Sogdians, who no one's ever heard of now or never met any today, the Sogdians who come from kind of northern Central Asia were the prime merchants of the Silk Road. It was said, that their voices were like honey. They could kind of soften anyone into buying anything they liked. And from about the 3rd century to the 7th century, they were the kings of the Silk Road. Today, they've just gone. And the same with the Tanguts, this great warlike group who had a very, very odd writing system, invented all by themselves, which is still not properly deciphered. Beautiful, beautiful art, and a sort of difference. They come up and then they fall. Genghis Khan wipes them out just overnight, and so it is. It is a bit of a kind of romantic misnomer and perhaps that's why one belt, one road is used more. I'd also like to sort of put in a plea, really, for it to be not one belt, one railway line, but more to sort of stick, the idea that things like railways, which are marginally less polluting, that I just find that the kind of lorry traffic thundering along the Gansu corridor is depressing, and that consideration for the environment one would hope would be part of what happens, and that less road, more railway. Ships are okay, aren't they? Again, I'm not in the right sort of area. I wanted to ask you lots of questions about what Brazil thinks about it. Perhaps we can come back to that.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much. So finally, Keith, so as I understand it, the EU didn't sign the final communique. I'm not entirely sure why they would anyway. There was a communique at the end of the summit. The EU didn't sign it or put its name to anything. Perhaps that was because of a lack of consensus within the EU, because as you say, there were very different levels of representation across the member states. One of the criticisms of the Belt and Road Initiative is it exports China's bad habits in terms of structural imbalances, of over-debtedness, imperfections in the legal system. And in fact, a Chinese expert, this is not my opinion, it was a Chinese expert speaking here about this 6 months ago, said that it exports an idea of illegality in a way, or the Chinese sort of attitude for legality, which is different obviously to most of the partners it's dealing with. How do you embrace that criticism? Do you think that it's just basically an intellectual imbalance that has got to be rectified in the same way that trade imbalance has got to be rectified? Or is there some kind of truth or point in it?
Thanks very much, Kerry. Before attempting to answer your question, I should say it was somewhat remiss of me when I started. I said that my first visit to China was in 1981. What I should have added was that it was as a member of a SACU delegation. So, so I think it's rather.
So ask kind questions.
Rather important to underline at an event like this. As for Kerry's question, I read, the various pieces in the newspapers, presumably much the same ones as Kerry has read, that Germany and the EU had raised some questions about the final communique. According to the report, so I think a couple of issues were raised, including one about they wanted greater guarantees of environmental sustainability. However, the actual communique begins by doing it in the names of various delegation leaders, and basically the only ones listed are heads of state and government, rather than the other 70 plus countries that were also represented there. When I did a quick add up, I got 30. Which is why I used the number 30. I could have easily miscounted, but I made it 30. I think the discrepancy between 29 and 30 is because the only non-head of state or government that gets included is Aung San Suu Kyi of Myanmar, Burma, presumably because she is, as we all know, the head of state in all but name. So, as to the substance of it, is it just exporting China's bad habits? Well, I mean that danger exists, but the question is that is that what defines the thing as a whole, and is it its primary characteristic? And I think this is just, and no reason why it shouldn't be, because the actual situations have a lot of similarity. This is like a lot of the questions that are raised about China's investment in Africa, for example, or China's trade relations with Latin America and so on. And are there issues? In this, yes, there are. Sometimes Chinese companies operating in Africa do not operate with sensitivity to the local people, do not treat people who work with them well, do not employ enough local people. That's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that many Chinese companies do those things. They do employ local people. They do make a contribution to the national economy, and so on. But in the West, it's only the it's only the negative examples that get publicity, and not the other side of the story. But as members of SACU will know, what has happened in China over the last 40 or so years is literally unprecedented in human history. No society on such a scale, about 22% of the world's population, has seen their economy, society, and their whole and everything about their lives transformed, so radically and so rapidly. This has never happened before. So this, it's simply not possible to say that whole thing is just going to be a good news story and it's going to be free, and it's going to be free of contradictions, free of problems, free of setbacks, free of negative phenomena. Simply things don't happen that way. But just as the main story is the transformation in the lives of Chinese people for the better, I think the main story of China's work in Africa, or what China does in Africa and Latin America, or what it does in the Belt and Road, is a good story. But if there are dangers, if there are things that people are concerned about, the question arises of what one should do about it. If people's criticisms and ideas are good and they have validity, I think the worst thing to do is to stand on the sidelines making those points in a negative fashion. The point is to engage. China is saying that it welcomes the engagement of other countries, that they want, as I said, an orchestra, not a solo performance. If people have concerns, if people think they can do better, then the best thing is to actually join in and make those contributions from within the tent.
A very technical point, but if you do have what you say valid criticism, to whom do you make that point? Who do you? I mean, what's the phone number for the Belt and Road Initiative?
Mr. Shao.
He's going to give me Donald Trump's mobile number, isn't he? Okay. Let you think about that.
No,
And yeah,
Do you want me to?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's a serious point because I mean,
Well,
as I understand it, the President Xi Jinping's speech, and then all of the ways this has been presented, is it's an opportunity for dialogue. It's not a normative idea. It's not a prescriptive idea. It is a idea which is openly expressed for people to engage with equally. So if you do have concerns about the governance and other things that are happening, to whom do you raise that? Who has ownership over that idea?
Well, yeah. I mean, this reminds me of Henry Kissinger's question
Yes.
about if I want to speak to somebody in Europe, who do I call? Of course, now we know it's Mrs. Merkel, but you know, when Dr. Kissinger posed the question, it was slightly less clear. But well, first of all, I think the Belt and Road Initiative is an overarching concept that has so many components. So there is no one number, although clearly it is President Xi Jinping's very much a project that has his personal imprimatur on it. But I think it's one where almost every department and organization in China now seems to be doing a Belt and Road Initiative, a project of some kind, and sometimes it's not clear to me who one should be talking to about what aspect. I think that will be clarified over time. But what I think is very important about these issues is that this is not the empires of the past where India was ruled from King Charles Street, the participants in the Belt and Road Initiative are all sovereign states. None of those countries is participating in it against its will, as in a kind of somewhat negative sense is shown by the fact that India stayed away last weekend. So on the one level, it's if countries themselves have issues to raise, China is not imposing its will on any other country. It's for them to raise it through their normal channels and their ongoing bilateral relationship, or indeed in international organizations of which they are all members, be that according to what it might be, the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, or whatever. Yeah. On the other level, I mentioned some of the British companies that are involved with Belt and Road projects, and law firms, some of Britain's biggest law firms, as I mentioned, like Linklaters, Pinsent Masons, are already working on a whole number of Belt and Road initiatives. So the issue, I mean, if people are concerned, for example, about the rule of law, this is something where companies in this country are already playing a role. Will it be straightforward? No, of course not.
Good. So we do it bilaterally. So we need not Mr. Xi's mobile number, but Mr. Xiao's mobile number.
May I?
Yeah.
May I just add, if I may, yeah, because the Belt and Road has aroused so many attractions, and now there are talks about some follow-up mechanisms. And for instance, everybody knows that there's a coordination for the Belt and Road in China, the NDRC, the National Reform and the Development Commission, which is the overall coordination body. However, apart from that, there are the Chinese embassies over 200 different countries, and in addition, there are now many networks being established in various, for instance, the think tanks, the people-to-people exchange mechanisms, the the banking mechanisms concerning the Belt and Road, and even I've been told that there are the like musical education associations or the media cooperation associations concerning the Belt and Road. So all these are being created to facilitate the follow-up actions.
Great. Okay. So we don't have a mic or anything, do we? So just Shao.
protect the human rights, as in according to the UN Convention on Protection of the Human Rights, as well as the principles, etc. And the second one, I think the lady down there asked about China's foreign policy, whether we will stick to our original 24-character policy or are there any changes. I should say that China has now become the second largest economy in the world, and it is also the biggest trading partner for more than 100 different countries. This has been demonstrating China's growing trend, and it's also leading many important aspects like the fight against climate change, the piracy in the Indian Sea, etc. But on the other hand, China is still, we see ourselves as a developing country. If you go to Gansu province or go to Xinjiang or elsewhere, you will see that the level of infrastructure development is still relatively backward compared with Britain or compared with other countries, even in Eastern Europe. So I think you should look at the two faces of China. That's why we, as far as China's foreign policy is concerned, President Xi made very clear that now we have still a developing country. We will play an important role in international affairs, but we do not have any intention to use the Belt and Road Initiative to export China's social systems or ideology. We have no intention to go for geopolitical the great power games. That's not our intention, and we have no intention to set up an exclusive bloc led by China. And for the question about the security protection, that's very important, especially along the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. We have been working with the Pakistanis to fight against the terrorist threats, and the Pakistanis have set up a special protection force, more than 10,000 people to protect the corridor. That's one the perspective. And another one about the agreements among these different countries is difficult because each at different levels of development. But I think, as we mentioned, that we will seek more agreements, more consensus among the parties concerned to focus on infrastructure development, the maritime cooperation, fishing industry, as well as aviation. And now we have also participated in more e-commerce cooperation. So those are some of the key areas we will strive for cooperation in the future.
Okay, so cargo ships, IPR protection, human rights, and military intervention. Keith, you answer those, and then maybe the other two can look at the UK general election.
Yeah, we'll see. I think I'll exercise an element of discretion in which topics I engage with, and do my best. Well, okay, so. No big deal to answer all of this. Let's talk about the UK general election and related matters first, because
Just a minute.
because I don't think it's fair to ask our esteemed friends from the embassy to comment on our internal affairs. And of course, SACU is a non-political organisation. It certainly doesn't take a view on British political party matters. I certainly have my views on those subjects, which I'm speaking in an individual capacity, but I also think that there are limits into how far we should go into those sort of questions. At an event like today's, with regard to Brexit, first of all, I would say that my view of the European Union and its engagement with the Belt and Road is more nuanced than to simply and only say that the European Union is sceptical about it. You know, there are issues, and it's normal to have issues, but I believe that the European Union will continue to engage with the Belt and Road, and I think that there are many countries within the EU who are some are more keen on the EU, are more keen on the Belt and Road than others, and that they too have their say within the councils of Europe. So whether or not Britain engages with the Belt and Road is not, in my view, an issue that's fundamentally determined by Brexit. I think that many people, again, I would like to see Britain engage with it more wholeheartedly than this. I would like to see more and more engagement, but I think that nevertheless the British government, and certainly increasingly British business, is engaging with Belt and Road, and it would have done so whichever way the referendum had gone on June the 23rd last year. Does Brexit give us more opportunities to engage in Belt and Road? Again, I think this is complicated. I think that, first of all, in my personal opinion, just to be quite clear, I wish we were not leaving the EU, and I think that were we remaining in the EU, the European countries collectively can have a stronger input into a project of the scale of Belt and Road than they can individually, and I think that and one of the reasons, although not the only one of the reasons why I'm against Britain leaving the EU, is I believe it will weaken the British economy, and therefore it will adversely affect people's standards of living. What this means in terms of the Belt and Road and engagement with China, however, is slightly different, in that certainly since George Osborne became the Chancellor, Britain has been very receptive to China's inward investment, more so than most other West European major economies. Because I have to say that because Brexit will weaken the British economy, in my view, it will make Britain all the more desperate and necessary for it to try and attract Chinese investment. And on one level, if I was at least a private Chinese investor, because I would think that the Chinese government operates on a much more strategic level, if I was a private Chinese investor, I might be quite pleased with the prospect of Brexit, because I think that you could drive a harder bargain on the subject. On the other hand, even if Britain becomes even more receptive to Chinese investment as a result of Brexit, I think that the other side of that is that actually Britain, whilst it will certainly retain a whole number of attractions for Chinese investors, on the whole, Britain will be less attractive as an investment destination, particularly with Theresa May's hard Brexit, which involves leaving not only the EU, but also the single market and the customs union, which will mean loss of passporting rights in the city. I'm getting a distinct impression you want to shut up, Kerry.
I noticed the very skillful way in which you have, in a very gentlemanly fashion, answered the first question and left human rights, IPR protection, infrastructure to Francis and Shao.
I'm prepared to go on. I'm prepared to go on.
I think you've given a very good. So I don't know. Maybe IPR protection.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, because there are so many areas. The IPR protection is a very important part and parcel of the overall the Belt and Road Cooperation, and we attach great importance to that, and we are doing our best to protect the copyrights of various countries concerned, and we are also trying to bring the standardization, the standards of the different countries into more harmony with each other. I've been to India quite a few times. For instance, I've been to the software capital down there. They are very, very smart in designing the software. Many of them also set up their business in Shanghai, Shenzhen, or Zhongguancun, or Beijing, and they are doing a great business. I think they will have better IPR protection in the future. And secondly, about the infrastructure development projects, whether they are controlled by the government or whether the people in China, Chinese companies will have some discounts. There are several different categories. We believe that most of the projects on the Belt and Road are based on commercial footing, that is open bidding and follow the international standards. But I should not deny that there are some projects, for instance, projects involving in CPEC in Pakistan, they are funded by the soft loans by Chinese government. And for these projects, according to the provision in the providing of the soft loans, they should be designated to some Chinese companies, and they will enjoy some special preferences. So there are different categories, but for the vast majority, I think they should be on commercial basis. And your question about the security of the 9 countries, as Trump mentioned, I think, as I mentioned, many of those Belt and Road countries are around those countries in the Central Asia or the Middle East. And we are working very closely with the local governments and police forces to step up protection, especially, I think, yesterday in Pakistan, near the Gwadar port, and there are some incidents during which 2 or 3 local Pakistani guards were killed. And I think we try to work with the Pakistani authorities to step up the cooperation. As for Jeremy Corbyn's foreign policy, I was in Chatham House last week, and Jeremy came to deliver a major speech, and I was lucky to enter their ballot system, and I was luckily elected to be present at his conference, and I noticed that he pays a lot of attention to human rights, to China. He talked about the South China Sea issue, but he also said that China's rights, you should not ring an alarm bell concerning China's rights. You should not look that way. And I think we also hope that China and the UK, whoever will be the new Prime Minister of UK in next month's election, we are ready to talk with the British on human rights. And we are making preparations for a new round of human rights dialogue to talk about the issues of common concern. As for the steel industry, I think China's surplus of the steel industry is a reality, but we have no intention to dump our steel in other countries. As for the British steel industry, we know that it is in a not very promising stage at this moment, but it's not mainly China's fault. That is, and China's export to Britain only accounts for a tiny proportion of the imports in Britain. So I think, but we are ready to work with the EU through the working shop steel so that we can come up with some mutually satisfactory solution. As for Brexit, I think you have answered the questions.
But what do you say about the steel and working with the EU? What a pity we won't be in the EU to benefit from
but
it.
so far you are, at least in the next 2 years. And for the Brexit, I think it's both opportunity but also a challenge for the Chinese companies. Some companies say that the changes of the pound and making the real estate in London and elsewhere cheaper, and that's why many Chinese real estate development are now coming to buy more property in the city and elsewhere. But on the other hand, it's also some kind of uncertainty. That's why some Chinese investors would prefer to have a wait and see to see when the dust will come down. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It sort of reminds me of the thing that Obama said in a different context. But so whoever wins the election, we're sure that she will take China seriously. Do you want to say anything, Francis? Or
I would only say very briefly that I do think that the discussion on human rights is fantastically important, and there are very many things of concern. But I do think it's equally important that these things should not be done sort of in your face and not in a kind of blustering manner. I think we will get much, much further if we talk seriously, but behind closed doors, and also with much more subtlety. I think there are paradoxical interventions that could be used. There are arguments that could be used that are much more convincing than a sort of slam of the door.
What about human rights in Britain?
Well, that's what I mean, exactly. None of us should be too...
Why does nobody talk about it? Always human rights in China. Why not Britain?
Yeah.
It's shameful. Britain has committed crimes all over the world.
Keith, you want to say something about IPR?
Yeah, I just want,
20 million people died in India from famine. Where were their human rights?
Keith.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
just on the, I just wanted to make one quick observation on the question of intellectual property. Obviously, I think this situation is getting better and better, but I think it has to be also put in a historical perspective, in that there would have, if you look at Japan, there wouldn't have been any Toshiba or Sanyo or Fuji cameras or whatever without a very extensive taking of Western intellectual property by the Japanese at a period of their development. So there's an aspect of this which is quite normal. I think that the whole intellectual property issue in China is getting a lot better, and that's for a number of reasons, including international agreements that are entered into, enforcement mechanisms, and so on. But probably the most fundamental thing is the way that China itself is moving up the ladder of economic development, and it is becoming not simply a place where things are manufactured or assembled, but China is becoming an enormously important country in terms of research and development and innovation. So China now very much and increasingly has its own intellectual property to protect, and that creates a common interest for solving this issue in the interests of all concerned.
So the gentleman, yes, gentleman just by the wall.
No, yeah, okay, no problem.
Things, yeah.
No problem. Yes, maybe we start with the India thing. Yeah, I was at, as I mentioned, at Lucy yesterday, and about half of their questions are concerning India and Pakistan because they are more geopolitical oriented. On this question, I just want to reiterate that China's position on the Kashmir question has been consistent and very clear, and we believe that this is a question historical leftover between India and Pakistan, and it should be properly resolved between the two countries concerned through dialogue. And I want to stress that the projects China carried out in that area is to promote the economic development and people's welfare in that area. It's not directed at any other third country, and it should not impair upon China, each other's positions on that particular question. That's been made very clear. As for the CPAC, as I mentioned, that it has now involved about 39 different projects with a total investment of $18 billion, and it will benefit the well-being of the local people and local economy. And the second question concerning the Latin America, I think Kerry can tell you more because he's going to Latin America tomorrow. But I've been talking with quite a few colleagues from Chile, from Argentina, concerning China's projects in Latin America, because we believe that this Belt and Road Initiative is not only aimed at Asia, Europe, or Africa. It is actually, we are talking about the 21st century. So in the 21st century, the globe or the planet is not only the European continent. It is now spreading even to Australia, New Zealand. They have very strong interest to join the Belt and Road. And we are also open to the United States, because the United States also sent representatives to join the Belt and Road Initiative. And for Latin America, I think China now is the biggest trading partner for quite a few big economies in Latin America. And we are trying to use this Belt and Road Initiative to have more trade links, the commercial activities, cultural links, etc. But we have no intention to promote either China's Monroe Doctrine in Latin America or to squeeze the United States out of Latin America. That's not our intention. And the next question concerning the economic and the culture and education projects, that's a very important part of the overall Belt and Road. We call the 5 different components, one last component, but I believe is the most important one is the link of people's mind. That is through people-to-people exchanges, cultural exchanges, through young students sitting here, we can have more cultural understanding, better understanding to build this Belt and Road together. And for the SMEs, they played an important part. And that's why big companies like Alibaba or other e-commerce companies, they are trying to build a platform so that the British SMEs who do not speak Chinese, who do not have friends in China, in Beijing, but they can use the Alibaba platform to sell their whiskey or their products to China. So that is an important component, and there are specific promotion programs to get them involved. As for the water resources and environmental protection, it's also high on the agenda. I think just last week there was a seminar here about the Trump administration climate change policy, what impact and what China can play in the climate change negotiations. And I think in the Belt and Road Initiative, we are also cooperating with the Middle East countries and other countries to solve this scarcity of the water resources, especially with Kazakhstan or the bordering countries where we have to negotiate how we can share the water resources. And lastly, for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or the BRICS and other regional economic cooperation mechanisms, I think these work hand in hand with the Belt and Road Initiative. It will not step on the foot of each other, but they will have closer cooperation, even for AIIB or World Bank or Asia Development Bank. They are also very willing to work with the Chinese on this gigantic project.
Because as far as I remember, there's a National Development Reform Commission, Bagaway, and the Ministry of Finance. There was a white paper, wasn't there, about 2 years ago?
Yeah.
And that mentions 5 connectivities, which culture is one, then people to people, and then finance, and also policy
and infrastructure.
So there is a kind of ideational component at the heart of this, I suppose, which is true to the sorts of histories that Francis was talking about, that it was a route for ideas, which I suppose is really the most important thing. It is a route for ideas, and the kind of hybridity and the syncretic sort of nature of, the kind of Chinese belief system now being, able to kind of reach out into the world and be understood better. That's very important. That's very, very important. Okay, any particular points on any of these issues that you wanted to raise?
Just a couple.
Yeah.
I must learn from my friend Mr. Shao how to go right through in quick succession all the answers without missing a single point. I always manage to forget one, but as he addressed every single issue, I'll exercise my right just to make a couple of comments only. About the whole China-Pakistan economic corridor and so on, the question that was raised by our Indian friend. According to what I read in the Indian newspapers, in the Hindu to be exact, in the build-up to the Beijing Forum, the Chinese ambassador in New Delhi made a number of speeches and statements and so on, and offered a number of concessions or ideas to finesse the problem. Unfortunately, it didn't seem that agreement on that could be reached in time. My own observation in this is, as Mr. Shao said, there are United Nations resolutions on Kashmir going way back for a considerable time, and China's position, as I understand it, is that it supports those United Nations resolutions, and as he said, as an issue left over from history, believes it's a matter for India and Pakistan to sort out. The point I would like to make is that I think we can perhaps learn also take something away from China, one aspect of China's approach to the South China Sea issue, where there are also some territorial disagreements. And going back to at least to the time of Deng Xiaoping, if not before, but certainly to the time of Deng Xiaoping, China has said that even though the disputes or disagreements over sovereignty may remain, there is no reason for the countries concerned not to reserve their positions on that for the time being and to cooperate in economic development and utilizing the resources for mutual benefit. And I think that it is, of course, the Belt and Road has political implications, but it is primarily an economic project. It is not a political alliance, and the point is economic development. And it seems to me it should be possible for the countries concerned to engage in economic cooperation in the region concerned, in which everybody has a legitimate and serious interest, whilst reserving the differences over sovereignty until such a time as they can be resolved. And of course, to a certain extent, history also shows that if you have economic connectivity and economic integration, that provides a more conducive environment for a long-term solution to the problem. With regard to what Francisco was asking and saying about Latin America, I think it's worth noting that in his remarks at the forum, President Xi has said that that the Belt and Road is not a closed initiative. It's open to other areas and regions of the world to join in, and one of the ones that he specifically mentioned was Latin America. And there were two heads of state from Latin America participated in the Beijing Forum, the presidents of Chile and Argentina. And I think the Argentinian case is quite interesting because it's a reflection of what happens in a number of countries where there was a change of government in Argentina, as people will know, broadly speaking, from the left to the right. And the incoming government of Argentina at first sought to make a certain political capital out of questioning agreements that have been made with China by the previous government. But now that government, as I said, partly at least from what Francisco was saying, that there is no investment coming from the United States, the government of Argentina, despite having had reservations or whatever about some aspects of the relationship with China before, is now very keen to develop those relations with China itself. And similarly, President Bachelet of Chile said that Chile could be the link between the link or the bridge between Latin America and Asia, specifically China. And so, China has what is sometimes called an omnidirectional policy. If China is interested in the development of relations with one country or region, it is not at the expense of another country and region. And I think that the Chinese interest in Latin America will remain strong. And I noticed in the Chinese news agency the other day that President Xi has sent his special envoy to the inauguration of the new president in Ecuador, which is a good sign.
Good, excellent. So, Francis, do you want to say anything?
Oh no, I'm just very interested in listening to that, because it does seem, if you try and tie the One Belt, One Road a bit too much to the Silk Road, it does leave an awful lot of the rest of the world, stranded on the far end. And I'm glad to hear this is not the case, that you can be involved somehow or other.
Yeah, maybe just add one point about the sustainable development and the energy, because there, according to the agreements reached after the Belt and Road Summit, there are altogether 270 different concrete propositions. Quite a few of them are on sustainable development and environmental protection. I just give you one. For instance, the Chinese Environmental Protection Ministry announced that they plan to establish with the UN One Belt, One Road Green Development International Alliance. So this is one of the concrete propositions out of this summit.
Great. So I think we have one more very quick. So very, very quick. So final. Okay. So the gentleman.
Yeah, I'm Dave as a SOAS student from Macau. I wonder, what do you think about Russia's role in the Belt and Road Initiative? Because everyone knows that Russia is still rather influential in Central Asia, but sometimes the initiative is seen as a Chinese attempt to expand its influence, those sorts of things. So, do you think that China can count on Russia's full support in terms of the development of the Belt and Road? And if yes, what sort of support Russia is capable of giving to China?
Russia, good. That's always a good one. Yeah, the gentleman.
Okay, hi. I work for a technology company in the UK right now, so I'll try and keep it brief. So right now, I think you mentioned about the cultural and language issues and barriers. I think, in my opinion, that's still quite an issue right now. So, for example, in my company, when we look at offshore resources, we still look at people from India rather than China, even though it's in the skill sets. That side is still kind of the English levels, English kind of language skills that we look at. Obviously, in China, if we compare the English levels and proportion of speak English compared to like maybe India and Europe, obviously, due to their colonial history, that might be an issue, but it's still a major kind of barrier. And likewise, the UK, British people speak Chinese is like slightly behind. So my question is that in the future of China and Belt and Road Forum, how are we going to address this issue, and especially when it's catalyzed by what Keith mentioned about so Western media, how it portrays this kind of difference, doesn't really help bridge that gap between the cultural barriers and the language issues. So how is that going to be looked at moving forward?
What issue?
Language and cultural barriers.
And then, so there's the gentleman there, and then the gentleman there, and then that's it.
It is a question, quite a simple question actually for Francis. You mentioned Francis Princess School. I think that's what it is, where it is, and how easy it is to go and visit there. But you make it sound very interesting. So.
Princess School, okay. And the gentleman at the back.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Kashish Bhattani from the University of Warwick. My question is for the Honourable Minister. Taking at face value the Minister's open declaration that the OBOR is not a vehicle, is not meant to be a vehicle for hegemonic exports, if you will, and Mr. Keith's overt optimism with Chinese leadership coming to age with OBOR. My question is, what is the PRC's commitment to ensure a democratic, fair dispute resolution mechanism under the OBOR framework to alleviate concerns of small states regarding economic strong-arming by China, as it has exercised in some instances with respect to, say, Vietnam, Taiwan, or even Japan?
Okay, then finally the lady.
Hello, my name is Han. I'm a PhD student in digital humanity in King's, and thank you, Shao, you introduced the digital silk road.
Yes.
And my question is to Dr. Francis. I also visited the Dunhuang exhibition, and I also contributed to the digital Dunhuang. And our China is emphasizes harmony in culture, that concept. I mean, in Chinese we call it 和文化. So I want to ask a question: how you, what's your perspective about the class in civilization and the culture integration?
Good. Okay. So Mr. Xia has done such sterling work. Shall I help you answer the Russian one? Why don't I? So first of all,
the Latin American one.
Yeah, no, the Latin American one's great. Any Russians here? Any Russians here? Yeah, really Russian? You speak Russian. Any Russians here? Any holders of Russian passports? Okay. Okay.
Open to being given one.
So I know. Yes, I mean, no, that was in the Soviet Union era, Keith. There's just one thing about Russia. It's really, I mean, so it's a 15th the size of the Chinese economy. So it's 7% the size of the Chinese economy, and so there's a massive. Although geopolitically we give Russia a lot of attention, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but economically it's a smaller economy than Italy. It's a smaller economy, far smaller economy than the UK. A smaller economy. I think it's the world's 16th biggest economy. So of course it's got nuclear weapons and it's got a lot of space, a lot of land. But really, it is an extraordinary thing that we keep on saying that Russia is trying to win elections. Well, it didn't work in France, did it? And trying to, I mean, good luck supporting Comrade Corbyn next week, but yeah, next month. But I mean, I think it's sort of overprivileging. It's overprivileging its geopolitical role. What's interesting about the strategic kind of movement of the Belt and Road Initiative is that Central Asia, I think it's the dominant, China's the dominant investment partner for a lot of Central Asian countries now. And that, of course, is Russia's area of strategic interest, but it's done in an economically subtle way. So it's hard for Russia to really say this is not legitimate. And indeed, President Putin went to the summit, didn't he? And also, I noticed in Central Europe last week, the 16+1. So Serbia is a member of the 16+1. The 16+1 is 16 European countries, of which I think 11 are members of the European Union and 5 aren't. And Serbia is obviously applying to join the European Union. And Latvia, I also went to. I noticed that these countries truly regard the opportunities coming from China as a counterbalance to the very loaded history that they have with Russia, because they were obviously, in the case of Latvia previously in the Soviet Union, sort of sphere of influence, and in Serbia being in the former Republic of Yugoslavia. And so it is an extraordinary achievement for China to have built this sort of corridor of influence, which has been done in a very benign way. I mean, or a way in which it has not been possible for Russia to say this is not legitimate. I mean, it's quite extraordinarily successful. Whether it will lead to anything or not is another thing. Also, completely unaffected, completely unconnected to the Belt Road Initiative. I went to Marshal Tito's mausoleum in Belgrade, and the only other people there were Chinese tourists and a delegation from Shanghai. So I said, why are you here? And apparently Tito's grave, he died in 1980, and so his grave is in this Chinese tour book, and Chinese money is the only thing that supports President Tito's grave. So this shows that China's influence in the world economically is in unexpected places. Okay, so the final questions were really about I forgot what the final question. I mean, do you want, so I mean, if we start from Francis, so you have the Prince's School one. Yeah.
The Prince's School is in Charlotte Road. I think it's E2, Shoreditch, E2. They have a very good website where you can find out about the hours, and I recommend you go in the morning because they have classes in the afternoon, but you have to go fairly quickly. And the other thing was a bit about I think digital technology has made an enormous difference to our understanding of the cultures of Central Asia. I mean, through the simple digitization, really, of the contents of Cave 17, which range through the language and scripts of a massive area. And also, which, I mean, they bring things together in the most extraordinary way. That, you know, we have, for example, in the British Library, there is the front part of a lovely little book of the calligraphy of one of the Tang emperor's calligraphers, Chen, and the back part is in Paris. Well, digitally, we can bring the whole thing together. They're not going to be physically brought together, but they can be in that way. And also, it's not just, I mean, I say Dunhuang, that's a kind of shorthand for Central Asia. If I was German, I'd always say Turfan, because those are their main sites. But, and you have German experts on Turfan texts. We have Chinese experts, for example, Tangut in Ningxia and so on. The putting together the images from Dunhuang, now, if you look again at this exhibition, the quality is fantastically high. Starting off, digital images not so good and so on, they're getting better and better. But you can really see, we really bring together the cultures, and I think it's the most amazingly helpful thing that it also, not only can people look at, in the comfort of their own homes, at the whole sort of history of civilization through text in that area, but also it does protect the originals considerably, and it's a very good way of not making people breathe or drop coffee on the original things or go into the original caves and breathe. So it's a very important part of the future, and we, you know, it's very cooperative.
Great, Mr. Xiao, any final comments?
Yeah. I just briefly touch upon some of the points mentioned. One also about follow up on the China-Russian relations, as mentioned. We believe is also very important. For instance, in Russia, they have their own vision for future development. They call it the Eurasian Economic Alliance. But we are now in agreement with the Russians to try to coordinate the Belt and Road Initiative with their strategic planning, so that we can go hand in hand with each other, not at the loggerhead with each other. Of course, for the main projects, of course, is the oil and gas pipelines linking the two countries. But in the future, I think there are more opportunities for cooperation in terms of cultural exchanges, tourism, and other language exchanges, etc. And also you talk about the language in particular. I think that's important, and also how to change or to improve the image of the Western press towards China, towards the Belt and Road Initiative. I think one of the results of the forum is the agreement to set up Belt and Road Media Associations, something like that, so that they can exchange views among the medias, so that they can know better with each other. And also, lastly, I think that the gentleman there talk about how to solve the disputes among the various countries, such as with Japan, Vietnam, or others. I think that we have also pointed out that we want to have more coordination among the 100 different countries. Sometimes it's hard to find agreement and each individual case, but we try to solve them through more dialogue, more consultation, and we have no intention to impose China's propositions on the others. It is more or less a win-win approach. So finally, I very much appreciate this opportunity to exchange views with you, and maybe during the coffee time, if you have more questions, I will be happy to talk with you even further. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Right. On the question of Russia, really, other people have, particularly Mr. Shao, have said the points that I would like to have made. I think it's just worth noting that in all the main pictures of grouping the main group pictures coming out of the Beijing Forum, the one the state leader who is next to President Xi Jinping the whole time is President Putin, and I think that underscores the importance of the China-Russia relationship and the importance that China places on the Russian role in the Belt and Road. Of course, there are a number of other regional bodies and arrangements that overlap with some parts of the Belt and Road, and one important one of those is the Eurasian Economic Union, which Russia initiated, presently grouping also Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and Tajikistan. But that is one of the organizations that China and President Xi said in his speech would be organizations with which the Belt and Road would coordinate. Our friend from Warwick University raised I have to say I found some of the ways in which the question was phrased were rather loaded, which I think really highlights that people have different ideas about things. But I just like to put to underline I think the importance of seeing things from other people's point of view, in that you raised the question, you talked about smaller countries that China might bully, and one of them you mentioned was Japan. Now, it's not I don't have a personal animus here, as it happens. My brother is married to a Japanese woman. My oldest nephew is married to a Japanese woman. Half of my own family is Japanese. But over 30 million people in China lost their lives or were injured in the war against Japanese aggression from 1931 to 1949. The struggle against fascism that began first and lasted longest.
Our speakers. So one of the jokes on Weixin or sort of WeChat is when you say win-win, it usually means China wins twice. However, we have learned today that there is actually 3 wins when we have a panel with Francis Wood, Shao, and Keith. You know, we, the audience, win 3 times. But we actually going to win a 4th time because the great chair of SACU, Zoe, will say some final words. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Zoe.
And I just wanted to say very briefly, thank you for that excellent panel. I mean, it demonstrates the breadth of perspectives within SACU. This is the SACU plug, so this, I hope you're listening carefully. So they're all SACU members. I particularly wanted to thank Dr. Jenny Clegg, another vice president, who took a germ of an idea and coached the panel to give us this really splendid presentation. I wanted to thank Lao China Institute for their hospitality, and particularly their biscuits and coffee and tea we're going to enjoy in a minute, and the Guanghua Bookshop who provided the book. Particularly I wanted to thank Ros Wong, who will be standing at the door in a minute because this is the last thing you've got to do. Ros Wong has done all the work to make this happen as a practical thing. We can have creative ideas on content, but making events happen takes a lot of work. So consider joining SACU. As you can see, we're now in the era. 50 years ago, there was a particular reason for forming SACU. Over 50 years, it's been building friendship and understanding. We're now talking about an era of continuing to link in people's minds, as Zheng said. So, before you join us for tea and coffee, and talking with other SACU members, there's lots of SACU people here, you've got one thing to do, which is to fill in your feedback form. It's long and boring, we're sorry it's so long, so just fill in the bits you want to fill in. Most importantly is, how did you hear about this event? Because we're so pleased to have reached so many of you, and we want to continue to reach you, so please tick that box and tell us how we reached you. So looking forward to welcoming you in the Somerset Room for tea and coffee, and thanks again to our panel.